Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Sahar Driver. I use she, her pronouns. I am co-director of the newly formed Color Congress. I am an Iranian American woman with long brown hair, wearing a turtleneck shirt that is white, burgundy, and dark blue, and sitting against a textured background that is magenta, with the words Color Congress, our logo, in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. I am speaking to you from unceded Muwekma and Ohlone land in what is also known as California, Oakland. I name this to recognize the history and enduring presence of Indigenous people in all the lands where we are living and working, and to honor the enduring resistance of Indigenous people to ongoing and persistent injustices. I hope that you'll take a moment to enter into the chat box the Indigenous nations whose lands you're joining from. And I'd like to invite my co-director, Sonia, up to briefly say hello.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you, Sahar. And welcome to all folks who are joining us today. My name is Sonia Childress. I'm joining you from unceded Tongva land in Southern California. I am a Black woman with long locks, glasses, brown skin, gray top, with a background of a beautiful purple and magenta textile print with the words Color Congress behind us.
As you can see, we have ASL interpretation available. Thank you to Andrea Lust, who is providing this service. We are also providing live closed captioning. Thank you to Karen Schmieder, who is providing that service. To access that on the desktop, click on the CC button at the bottom of the window. On a mobile device, you have to click more with the 3 dots. And in the drop-down menu, you'll find closed captioning as an option. We just want to thank you for joining us today. This event is one of 2 that the newly formed Color Congress is hosting at Sundance in celebration of our launch this month. The Color Congress is a national collective of organizations that are majority people of color and led by people who are Black or African American and or of Indigenous, Latinx, Pacific Islander, Asian, Arab, and Middle Eastern descent, that are aimed at centering and strengthening nonfiction storytelling by, for, and about people of color across the United States and territories. We do this by supporting, resourcing, and connecting these organizations and building their collective power so that this ecosystem can be a more powerful force for change. We're hosting this conversation in particular because at the present moment of acute hardship in this country, which is fueled by a vast wealth gap, rising hate crimes, climate disasters, white supremacist violence, and an erosion of our democratic institutions, we need nonfiction storytelling. It continues to be one of the most trusted sources of information and one that is able to reach people in ways that facts and figures alone don't. It's why social movements so frequently rely on this kind of storytelling. But importantly, we need storytelling that is made by people who are closest to the issues and most impacted by them, who can define the challenges they face for themselves and capture them with nuance and beauty. The points of view and experiences they bring can help transform and heal society. This is why Color Congress exists. We believe that building the strength and power of organizations in nonfiction that are led by and committed to leadership, storytellings, and audiences of color is a critical intervention that could have a generational impact on the documentary field because it is focused on shifting the locus of power. It is an intervention that goes beyond inclusion and asks that we center those organizations that have already been doing the work, in some cases for decades. We see in 4 of the program officers that seated the Color Congress this kind of bold and courageous leadership by people of color in philanthropy that we need. And we asked if they would be willing to have a bold and courageous conversation about the political and cultural experiences that have shaped their worldviews and funding strategies. Of course, they agreed. Here to moderate this conversation is Roddy Taylor, who is head of artists in residence at Concordia Studio, where she leads the company's action to develop, advance, and champion a select team of diverse documentary filmmakers from the US. Roddy is no stranger to grant making or Sundance. Before joining Concordia, she spent 10 years at Sundance Institute as head of the Sundance Documentary Fund. She has long been an advocate for filmmakers, with one of her most visible contributions being the design and direction of the documentary core application, a common funding proposal that has been adopted by most US documentary funders, and the Doc Film Money Map, which is designed to help independent filmmakers use public money to finance their films. There are links to those resources in the chat so you can learn more about them. These 2 resources and more are among the many reasons why Roddy is beloved in our field. Roddy, I'm going to pass the mic to you to introduce our guests and get started.
Thank you so much, Sahar and Sonia. I can't tell if I'm on, but thank you so much for having me today. I'm just thrilled to be a part of this conversation about this new initiative. I am joining from the unceded land of the Tongva, also known as Los Angeles. A quick visual description: I am an African-American female. My pronouns are she, her. I have brown skin, shoulder-length brown hair, and tortoise-shell glasses. I'm wearing a white blazer. And I'm sitting against an incredible virtual backdrop that is a bright pink, purple, and magenta background provided by Color Congress. And today I am just really moved to get to be part of this conversation. This week, we all celebrated Martin Luther King's 93rd birthday. And as much as we all love his I Have a Dream speech, I'm also always captivated by his 1967 book, Where Do We Go From Here? And it's something that always kind of captures my imagination, that question: given a set of circumstances, a set of challenges or problems, where do we go from here? And incredibly, these bold visionary thinkers have come together and crafted a solution, an innovation, an experiment, creating something brand new that is birthed right now. And so I'm delighted to get to talk to all of you. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to briefly give your land acknowledgement and visual description, and then we'll get into the conversation. First, Chiwei Yang, our Senior Program Officer of Ford Foundation Just Films Initiative, where he has helped found a number of innovative funding initiatives, including Critical Minded, supporting the capacity of cultural critics of color. And he has worked extensively as a film curator, consulting with MoMA Doc Fortnight, PBS POV, and for 10 years, he was director of the San Francisco International Asian American Film Festival, the largest event of its kind in the nation. Welcome, Chiwei.
Hi, Roddy. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Chiwei Yang, he, him pronouns. I am joining from Lenape land in Brooklyn. And I am an Asian American man with shoulder-length black hair. I have black glasses on, and I'm wearing a blue jacket on a black shirt. And I'm sitting in front of a multi-patterned background provided by Color Congress that is many different hues of red and purple. It's great to be here.
Welcome. Also joining from Ford Foundation, John Sesrigoff, who makes grants globally in documentary film, new media, and visual storytelling for the foundation. John is an artist, a curator, and an arts administrator. And he was formerly executive director of the Storied Flaherty Film Seminar, and also created the inaugural film program at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. And he does extensive research, writing, and visual documentation of Black culture in the coastal South. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here and to be a part of this conversation. I'm joining from Lenape land in Brooklyn, New York, and I am a Black man with shaved sides and unruly top, and matted beard and partial beard and a goatee that's quite full. And I am brown skin with bags under my eyes because my daughter woke up very, very, very early. But very happy to be here. And I use he, them pronouns.
Welcome, John. Also joining us today is Danae Peters. Danae is our documentary impact consultant and film programmer. She's consultant on impact campaigns with Picture Motion and Film Sprout. And as a film programmer, she's been on the programming teams for Hot Docs, the Toronto International Film Festival, Doc NYC, Human Rights Watch Film Festival, and Tribeca Film Festival. But she's here today as program officer overseeing documentary field infrastructure portfolio at the Perspective Fund. Welcome, Danae.
Thank you. Hi, I'm so grateful to be here. I'm Danae. I use she, her pronouns. I am also using a Color Congress backdrop. It's gorgeous. It's pink and purple. I'm on Lenape land in Brooklyn. I have brown skin. I'm a Black woman with an also unruly puff at the top of my head. I wear tortoiseshell glasses, and today I'm wearing a green turtleneck.
Excellent. And last but definitely not least, Lauren Papps from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. She's Senior Program Officer in Journalism and Media there, where she supports accurate, just, and inclusive news and narratives that inform, engage, and activate people to build a more equitable future. Her lifelong commitment to work at the intersection of media, policy, and civic engagement includes previous work with the RADA Film Group, Black Public Media, and Public Policy Productions. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in front of a beautiful purple and red Color Congress background that looks to be woven in the manner of indigenous to the Americas textile. I am a Mexican American and European American woman with shoulder length, dark brown hair, wearing dark green glasses, turquoise necklace, and a gray turtleneck. And I am coming to you from the unceded lands of the Potawatomi, Odawa, and Ojibwe people known as Chicago.
Excellent. This is so amazing. Before we dive into talking about this wonderful initiative, Color Congress, and how it emerged and unfolded, let's step back for a second and learn more about your individual journeys, professional journeys into the world of philanthropy, and how that journey informed your perspective on the world that you inhabit. Before serving as grant makers, each of you were grant seekers within nonprofit organizations. So I'm wondering how that experience or other professional experiences on top of being people of color in philanthropy, etc., how does that influence how you show up into this world? How does your individual lens inform your interventions in the field? Let's start with Chiwe.
Well, I think that as a grant maker, I'm most interested in understanding someone's work on their own terms, because that is the way in which I would want to be understood as a grant seeker, and that's understanding how someone's work does what they wanted to do and how it'll happen, right? Not according to the ways in which we believe it will, but according to how someone understands that. And I think that's such an important piece. And that's the piece that I'm always looking for, because it's the terms in which I would want to be understood by. And another piece of what I bring in from being a grant seeker is I'm very conscious of this social aspect of the field, right? There's many different crowds and cliques and gatherings of people. And I think I'm very wary of being too comfortably socially, because we all go to different events, and who you talk to, can be read in many different ways. And I always try to circulate and make sure that I am in front of new people, that I don't reinforce existing relationships, but I'm always forging new ones by how I socialize, because that is how so much work is done. And I think this sort of gap between grant seekers, grant makers, and within the field can be very exclusionary. And I try to actively sort of rub some friction against those established dynamics wherever I go. And I think that's a lot of what I carry from being a grant seeker and now being a grant maker.
And John, you are also an artist as well as a grant maker, and have also been a grant seeker. Tell us a little bit about how that informs your role, how you see your role or your work?
Yes, I think especially my role as an artist and filmmaker, attempting to make work using grants. I think I know firsthand sort of the difficulty in that, and especially the difficulty for emerging makers and makers of color. And there is no perfect roadmap. And so I think I bring that perspective that, you know, there isn't a cure-all for the ills of our field or for the injustices that we all face in the world at large, but there is an opportunity to redirect sort of resources and to change and shift the conversation for those who do have input in how resources are allocated. And so that's the perspective I bring to this work. And I just know that, you know, both as an artist and as a former executive director of a nonprofit, I know that the work that we do is crucial, that it is both life affirming and world changing. And so because we want to imagine this beloved community that Dr. King spoke about and others, you know, worked to secure, we are dependent on new ways of seeing the world from new artists to help actualize that vision.
Danae, to you, tell us a little bit about how your professional journey at different sides of the documentary film field, as well as your personal position as a young woman of color, now working in philanthropy, informs your work.
Yeah, this question makes me think about my experience as both a member and a board member of Brown Girls Doc Mafia and watching Iyabo Boyd's journey. It's an organization that advocates for now 5,000 plus women and non-binary people of color working in various aspects of the doc space. And it's an organization whose value is so clear to me as a woman of color working in this field. I also didn't even know that I needed it and how desperately I needed it until it existed. So knowing the power of that and watching Iyabo as a leader champion the organization and try to distill what was so clear to me and other members and what was felt through the process of engaging with this collective, trying to communicate that vision to funders was certainly eye-opening, and seeing how fundraising is such a labor-intensive and intense experience, and adding on to that, the cases where grant seekers feel like they're translating into a language that funders will understand makes it even more labor-intensive. So Brown Girls was really fortunate to find support amongst funders who really get it. And even working for-profit impact firms, I was very aware of the lengths that filmmakers were going to in order to get funding for their films, never mind funding for impact work. All of this, especially as someone who is new to philanthropy and working in a foundation where we seek to mitigate and eradicate some of the less helpful aspects of philanthropy, it all means that every day I'm thinking about the individuals, how to find collectives and informal groups who are organizing and strategizing and dreaming of better ways for the field to exist. It also means that I'm always striving to be as transparent as possible in the way that we engage with grantees. It means I'm really looking at the people behind the work, not just metrics, not just our proposed outcomes. And it also means that I'm constantly in awe of the leaders and the work that they put forth in order to get their work done. So my hope is that I'm also upholding my end of the bargain, which is to reduce the burden on grant seekers, as we are all striving for the same goal, which is content and relationships that can engage audiences and change what we see as possible for our societies.
Wow. Transparency, reducing the burden for grant seekers, looking for collective, looking for the whole person, all of these things that you're all saying looking at what is the work that they're trying to make. Lauren, you have so much experience from the MacArthur Foundation. I think you've been situated there at that institution longer than most people have been at these other funding bodies. You've seen a lot both before that and leading into that. Tell us a little bit about what informs your journey and your work.
For me, my experience was that I've been at the MacArthur Foundation now for 10 years. And I literally went within a matter of months from preparing grant applications and doing research on behalf of filmmakers to being on the funding side and reviewing applications by filmmakers and from organizations. And at the time, and still, it feels like winning the lottery to be part of a foundation. I'll be quite honest, that feeling of institutional power to be part of a group that is able to make funding recommendations, that I know how transformative that is for organizations and for filmmakers and for projects. I felt a little bit like has to be a mistake. So as a result of that, I've never really got comfortable. It's very easy to get comfortable at a foundation, but I've tried very hard to remember that I'm here because people took a chance on me. People allowed me to learn on the job. And what would it mean for me to remember that always, and then have the institution, to the extent that I can, take a chance on other organizations, take a chance on other people who might not always fit the box of what they think they're looking for, but trying to be part of that transformation to the extent that I can, because it is an incredible honor, and it comes with a huge responsibility. And as somebody who is mixed Mexican American and European American heritage, I know that I'm not always perceived as a person of color in different spaces, and that gives me privilege and has given me access in other ways that I don't have any control over. So what I try to do then is I could spend a lot of time and energy asserting myself and, explaining why I don't have a Spanish surname, and trying to define my identity, but I'd rather spend that energy showing up and doing that through actions and remembering that it's really important for communities of color writ large to have access to philanthropy, because there's such a deficit that we're trying to, the people on this panel and so many others are trying to correct for.
Amazing. So shifting a little bit from your individual journeys and backgrounds that led you into philanthropy and then inform your individual practice, and looking outward at the field more broadly, the field of philanthropy, there's a movement afoot to ask filmmakers to acknowledge their lens and positionality to the issues they aim to explore. And it seems like within the field of philanthropy, a similar call seems to be extending to traditional gatekeepers like funders. Is this sort of a historic moment? And if so, could you describe that? Lauren, again, with your long lens and perspective on the field of philanthropy and its shifts and changes, what do you see? Can you describe this moment?
I believe that there's a moment in philanthropy, as there is in a lot of institutions of long standing, to create conditions through which the staff can, and the leaders as well, can show up as their full selves, and bring more of their lived experiences to their role. And I think for any institution, that is a journey that has a lot of complexity and is really necessary, but is kind of never going to be completely over, because it's a constant striving. And for me, when I joined the foundation, the first thing that I learned was my job is to channel the institution. And if I can learn how to do that, then that's the way that I can be an effective team member and interact and interface with grant seekers and grant recipients. Over the years, I think under the leadership of Kathy Im, who directs the journalism and media program at MacArthur. And because of this ongoing kind of movement towards greater openness and equity in philanthropy, there have been opportunities to not only channel the institution, but see if we can propose new ideas and create new strategies through which the institution itself can change and can support organizations and individuals that they may not have supported before for a variety of reasons. I think that this is also needs to, as Danae mentioned, manifest through making the barrier to entry a lot lower for grant seekers, understanding that there are certain things that any given institution needs to see to be able to make funds or to be able to make grants, excuse me. But at the same time, you know, are we being duplicative? Is this overly burdensome? Is there another way to get this? Is there another organization that we could support that could then in turn support these organizations and individuals and projects, so that I don't feel that burden, and they're able to, you know, spend more of their time doing the actual work and creating the art and journalism that we want them to be doing.
You highlight something really interesting in terms of, you know, being people who came into philanthropy as field practitioners in a variety of ways, being people who came in as people of color, and at one and the same time, trying to carry those lived experiences and communities with you, but also being in a role where you needed to embody and be an instrument of the institution. And sometimes that is in alignment and sometimes not as much of in alignment. It'd be interesting to explore a little bit about how those, what allows for better alignment in terms of how you're able to bring more of yourself or the community that you feel you are bringing with you into the role. John or Chiwe, is that something you'd be willing to pick up a little?
Sure. I think, I mean, one for me, I'm a product of a number of communities. I'm a product of a faith community, a political community, a Black college community, film community, a grad community, whatever. And very, very rarely do those worlds intersect. Yet somehow I am a product of all of them. And I think realizing that, you know, there could have been an independent path where, and I've taken them in my life where I've tried to go it alone, but I know that we are stronger when we're, you know, in collaboration and in community with others. And so I think I bring that to the table, and recognizing that there is not one single space that prepares an artist or prepares a leader or prepares a thinker. We are, you know, a result of, you know, all of these spaces, and they all deserve to be honored, you know, equally. And so I think that's an awareness that I have, you know, in this field and in the work that I do, but certainly in all the spaces in which I move.
Let's talk about Color Congress. This incredible, bold vision and new initiative designed not just to diversify funding, but to shift power, Sahar and Sonia have said, including the decision-making power of philanthropy. What made this an important intervention? Danae, your work at Perspective Fund is all about the documentary field infrastructure. Can you say a little bit about this idea of shifting power in philanthropy?
Sure. Both personally and via the Perspective Fund's portfolio that's focused on the ecosystem of the doc space, I believe in the importance of there being collaborative field-led initiatives across the space, and that those be supportive spaces. I think that that's one of the keys to us being able to rebuild the doc field in the light that we hope for it to be developed. That's one of the ideologies that shapes my lens as a grant maker. I'm also not blind to the fact that in order for organizations and individual leaders to reach a place where collaborative action is ubiquitous, we need to be able to support their work right now and to empower them to be able to conduct their core work. I don't think we can expect the best collaborations to come from a space of scarcity. And as funders, I think it's really important for us to keep that in mind as a high priority. And I think that Color Congress is designed in a way that we're addressing this challenge simultaneously. I think that this initiative is incredible. The collaborative aspects of it make it all the more powerful. I also think that we are able to do more as a group of funders operating together than we would be able to do alone. At Perspective Fund, we're hopeful that it will also serve as a learning opportunity for us. It's a pulse check. Are we on the same page as those we seek to serve and support? What do we need more clarity on? What and who are we overlooking? These are all questions that we think that the Color Congress initiative will allow us to ask, and we hope that the field will also benefit from those answers.
Jiwei, Color Congress, shifting power in philanthropy, including decision-making power for grant making. Tell us from your perspective, give us your take on it.
Sure. Well, I think that, in a lot of ways, this is an intervention that's thinking about what is long-term investment in this sector, a sector that has worked for, been operating for many decades, undercapitalized, right? And so, what does long-term generational investment look like for undercapitalized organizations? And I think there's also an effort to rethink and redefine what field infrastructure is. It's not just money or resource, but is it about connective tissue? Is it about relationships? Is it about generational transfer of knowledge? These are the types of infrastructures that create movements. And a question that philanthropy often is thinking about is, how can we support a movement? Movements are organic. You can't engineer movements, but how do you support them so that they have longevity, they have momentum, they can keep moving forward on their own terms, right? And it's not, again, at the design of philanthropy, but it is at the service of the folks who are doing the work. And so the surest way to do that is to include, to have it informed by the folks who are doing the work. So that's deep participation and buy-in. And that's the surest way to create something for the long run. And I think Color Congress is designed with that in mind.
Amazing, amazing. Lauren, there were a lot of options in terms of how your organizations, Ford Foundation, MacArthur, Perspective, could have responded to all of the changes of the last few years and the great needs that the field was calling for, including giving, more training, support, resources, et cetera, to help traditional organizations, film organizations, increase and improve their DEIA activities and approaches, which is important. But tell us about the decision to do this, to support Color Congress as a major field initiative.
Well, I believe for all the reasons that my colleagues have stated, this is time for something new, that there is this opportunity for a generational investment for not only new and emergent organizations and collectives led by and serving people of color, of which there are many that are doing excellent and transformative work, but those that have been doing it for decades in an underfunded situation. So acknowledging both that history of under-resourcing and this tremendous energy in the field, the only way I think to really address that is the creation of the Color Congress. And in addition, something that in which the decision-making is not something that MacArthur itself takes on, but is created very intentionally with this goal in mind. This kind of is the continuation of a strategy that we've had in place since 2017 in our individual documentary film support of not any longer giving grants directly to film projects, but instead working through partner organizations, because we recognize that the more decision makers you have, frankly, the more diverse and perhaps better amount of decisions are taking place. And when it comes to more established organizations that want to and are making commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we hope to support that as well through the general operating support that that MacArthur has given them for many, many years. We're moving towards a place where that's an expectation. It's not necessarily something that we want to put all of our energy in through new resources, because there's so much need, as we've said, across the field of where resources have not flowed before. But for us, it's both and. Both things need to happen. And this is a very exciting opportunity to galvanize more support.
Beautiful. So over the last 2 years, all of the field conversations in all the different areas talking about, the need for new roadmaps, resources, support, opportunities, etc., transparency, equity. That time period reveals that advocacy provides the motivation for change, but it's been said that data provides the plan. So Chi-Wei, can you talk about the data that Beyond Inclusion revealed to you and the field?
Sure. It's the sheer numbers of the report that Sahar Driver wrote to inform the creation of Color Congress was really profound. There's an ecology of 100+ organizations that are doing this kind of work, that are POC led and serving across the country. Many of them are very small. Some are 1 year old, some are 40 years old. But it is a infrastructure that's been there all along, that has been invisible to many, but very, very visible to others, right? If we think about the pipeline for some of the most relevant creators today, this is the pipeline. This is where the risk-taking begins, right? Those sheer numbers of those organizations and the accumulated impact that they've had over time matched up with the information on where money comes from national funders is astonishing. They're inverse, right? There's outsized impact, people punching above their weight, and the money flows in the opposite direction to big, mainly white-led national organizations. But despite that, the work has continued and had great impact. So the question is, what could happen if they were resourced properly? Even more, right? And so I think that those numbers tell a very, very simple truth, of where the priorities have been for funders, what people have been able to do despite that, and what the possibilities are if there is a new type of investment made in them.
Amazing. So exciting to think what can happen, in our field with these resources, as you highlight, given how under-resourced organizations and communities have been. Can you also share what you hope to learn from A Lens Reflected, which is a soon-to-be-released study?
Yeah, and this is a study that I think all of the entities here supported the data collection and the research on. So, Day and Lauren would love your thoughts on this. But I think that I'll just say that from a forward perspective, it's a study that really looked at the diversity within documentaries which were supported by streaming distributors within the streaming era, and the diversity numbers within that. And those numbers are also very stark too. There is a high degree of accountability that has to be put in place with this new distribution and production economy. And a lot of it is transparency. These numbers just have to be very clear. And Danae, Lauren, love your thoughts.
Please.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the release of the full findings. The study is particularly interesting because it looks at doc representation by seeking to explain the hypothesis or anecdotal conversation, which is that white filmmakers are much more likely to create doc content that is about communities that they aren't a part of. It's, of course, something we've all spent a lot of time talking about, but we haven't had the data to support. So I'm really interested to see what we can learn through this process. And I think there are some really interesting conversations that are going to be sparked by this. I know that in some of the early findings, there has been confirmation that mixed film teams, meaning BIPOC filmmakers working alongside white directors, are much more likely to center stories BIPOC protagonists than a white director working alone. But I'm really curious about what this infers, what we can attribute that to. Are we talking about situations where a white filmmaker might bring someone on who is less empowered than they are in order to craft a story because they are concerned about the fact that they are telling a story from a community that they're not a part of? I think what's interesting about this research is that it will allow for us to dive into specific areas of a conversation that we've been having ad nauseum, but with data to support it.
Yes, I completely agree. And I think that the preliminary finding that most of the streaming and broadcast commercial dollars are going to white male filmmakers is something that I think people have intuited, but knowing that that is the actual data point and the fact really tells us something about where the center of gravity is in the so-called golden age of documentary. And through initiatives like Color Congress, there can be an opportunity to really shift that center of gravity and put more of a spotlight on the excellent work that's taking place, but maybe doesn't have as much of a platform and certainly doesn't have as much financial resource right now.
I'm hearing a real relationship between research, organizing, and advocacy and philanthropy in terms of how we respond to our current moment and how we create, the world that we want to live in. Talk about that intersection either from research to organizing or from organizing to research, philanthropy as its own form of field change, etc. John, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, that's a really, really layered question. I think, especially the last part about philanthropy as, field change. But I think the research is so important, especially when we're talking about the impact on diverse people in our field, because the anecdotes and the stories often are not enough. Like we're constantly having to show the inequities and across the field. But more importantly, I think what's emerging in terms of the new models of leadership within our organizations that we're seeing in the field is that the old structures didn't work, that it didn't create enough transparency, enough accountability, and we need something different. And so whether it's shared director responsibilities, co-director models, or if it's a decentralized leadership model, we know that this resonates with a lot of the communities that we come from, this idea of mutual aid being inherent in the work we do. And so philanthropy, while not being at its heart mutual aid, can help spur it and give it an engine to sort of be the vehicle that can keep going. And so that's sort of how that interplay exists for me.
So how would, if we looked forward into the world 5 years from now, a world that has had Color Congress living and thriving and supporting the field in new ways, what's the vision? What's the goal? Give us a picture. Lauren?
I simply envision a future where the incredible network of organizations that was listed and kind of explained in the Beyond Inclusion report that we're really, really grateful to Ford for commissioning, that those organizations feel supported, they have long-term funding, or they have opportunities for it, that the field of people of color led organizations and documentary have a chance to identify shared needs, areas of growth and opportunity, and have been able to put in practice potentially transformational projects that do this shifting of the center of gravity. And finally, I see a huge group of funders that both work in the space, but also maybe haven't worked in the space and recognize the incredible importance of funding nonfiction storytelling for cultural, social change, that they have provided an influx of funding that can make this possible, because there's a lot of room for additional resources. That's how this Color Congress is set up, because sometimes the most powerful thing philanthropy can do is come together, pool resources, and then step back and let people who have been leaders in the field, who have been doing this work on the ground, who have different perspectives, take the lead and make the decisions, because that's going to be, that's going to create different outcomes that are more grounded, oftentimes, in what the field needs and what it is positioned to do, not just for people of color, but for the whole society as a whole, because of the high stakes moment that we're in.
Beautifully put, and an invitation to others in the philanthropic community to join with this great group in supporting Color Congress Initiative and its goals and aims. Anything to add on the vision for the future in a world with Color Congress in it? Any one thing, Danae, then John, and we'll land on Chue.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything Lauren said. I also envision an ecosystem where there are reduced barriers to long-term sustainability, both for organizations and for creators. And I hope that we are contributing to an increase in redistribution of power, which I see as both funds and attention and visibility, and also the space to creatively problem solve. Obviously, Color Congress can't do all of this on its own. I hope that this also inspires additional initiatives that focus on BIPOC communities, as well as all of the others who have been historically excluded and kept out of having stability and success in this field because of classism, ableism, gender discrimination, any of the isms that we hate. So I'm inspired by this and hoping that it will be inspiring other actions.
Excellent. John?
Yeah, I think Chue alluded to this earlier about the intergenerational transference of knowledge, but also with a number of legacy organizations that have been around for 20, 30 plus years doing this work. We hope to see those organizations strengthened and hopefully infused with new emerging leadership that can sort of keep stewarding those missions alongside the number of new collectives and entities that are forming. So what we would like to see is, a strengthening of our sort of legacy organizations and a conversation with, while being in conversation with new and emerging entities.
Absolutely. And Chue?
In the world around us, in the world around us, I think there is, in many ways, a movement to decentralize, right? From national to local to regional to community-based. Politically, so much of the building blocks for social change are at the school district races and the state legislatures, et cetera. And the same can be said for this field. The building blocks are these local, regional, community-based organizations that are doing this work. And when you put them together and see what they can do together, that's the kind of tidal shift. And I think that we're going to see a lot of investment in those actors who can see things very differently from a very different perspective. And so seeing that kind of bottom up kind of influence, I think, come up is very important. And I think what I would like to see is a real, continued decentralization of agenda setting and power within this field, so that it's much more distributed, so there's multiple centers of who's setting the agenda within this field. And I think that would be it's much needed. There's a real sort of like accumulation of power in a few larger national organizations. Very important, but it just needs to be distributed more evenly. And I think that also, going back to the research question, there's a real need. There's so many different ways to assess this, to define a theory of change, to understand how stuff is happening, because we know it to be true that stuff works in a certain way, but it's just not codified. It's not research, it's not written about, therefore people don't pay attention to it. So I see a lot more research and assessment being done so that people can understand what does it mean that there is a bottom-up theory of change for documentary organizations, of color? What does that do? And how can we visibilize that? And I think that the investment in that part of the site is going to be very important, which will be the building block for a lot of other funders and resource holders to invest in this sector.
Incredible. The creation of a bold new world right here. Ralph Abernathy once said, "I don't know what the future may hold, but I know who holds the future." And in the hands of Color Congress, I feel like it's going to be an incredible journey. Back to Sonia and Sahar.
Wow, wow, wow. What an incredible conversation. What a refreshing conversation. Thank you so much, Roddy, for your brilliant stewardship of this really thoughtful and intentional conversation, and for your leadership and the role that you play in championing so many of our voices in the field. So I just want to thank you for accepting our invitation to lead this conversation. And to you for Danae, Lauren, John, and Chiwei, thank you. I mean, I will have to say, hearing from you all about the personal and cultural and professional experiences that shape your lives, and the philosophical ideas and political ideologies that shape your grant making it's a real gift. And many grant makers don't get to show up as their full, true selves in public. We understand the power dynamic, and we understand how you're trying to shift that power dynamic in big ways, like investments, and in small ways, like being parts of this conversation. So it's not lost on us that this is an unusual role that you all played today, and we're really grateful for it. And we really encourage all folks who are in grant making positions to show up as your full and authentic selves, and really connect with those of us in the field who really see you all as colleagues. That allows us all to see one another as allies in this work, to be able to be, when we're vulnerable and transparent. And it helps us build deeper trust and collaboration. That's the kind of environment we're trying to see at Color Congress. And we know that when we can do that across the field, we can move together boldly to really work together to transform our world. So I thank you all for joining us for this conversation and showing up the way you did. I also want to thank our tech team and Andrea Lust, our beautiful translator today, Felicia and Karen, who are helping us on the back end with production and transcription. We want to thank Sundance, and we want to thank you all for joining us today, and the positive energy that you've brought into the chat and into this field. We see you all, and we're just grateful to be in community with you all. I want to remind you all that Color Congress has one more event at Sundance. We're doing another launch event on Wednesday, January 26th. It's our official launch event. It'll be a virtual celebration of the legacy of leadership of people of color in our field. It's more Love Fest, more Valentines, bring it. Sahar and I will be joined by our wonderful board of advisors, veterans who really exemplify the kind of leadership in our field that we're trying to lift up. And in case you missed it, today, we have opened our call for unrestricted grants to people of color led and serving organizations in the United States and territories. Please, if you think you are an organization or an entity or a collective or a festival that is eligible, come to our website, check our eligibility quiz, and consider applying. And you can also join an FAQ webinar we will be holding on January 31st, where you can learn more about the opportunity and the application process, which we promise will be simple. So on behalf of Sahar, Andrea, and I at Color Congress, we thank you all for joining us today, and happy festivaling.
Thank you.